I was saying, y'all, but Rico from RicoScores. Sorry I'm late. I wasn't even at home when all of this news came out, but I'm super excited to announce the fact that Dan Quinn is killing it right now. First of all, we got to talk about why I already gave y'all the heads up that this could potentially happen, that Dan Quinn could put together a great staff. And when I say great staff, we got to talk about how the Washington Commanders just hired Eagles Brian Johnson as an offensive passing game coordinator, and also Raiders Jason Simmons as the defensive passing game coordinator. I know when you hear teams hiring passing game coordinators, is not the most exciting thing, but I'm gonna tell you why you need to be for these two guys, especially when it comes on the development side of things. I'm telling you, if you want the closest thing that we can get to that 2013 staff where we just had so many geniuses, so many prodigies, so many, once they get their opportunities, they're gonna be their own elite top tier guys at their respective specialties. This is that potential staff that we're bringing in right now. We have guys coming here to take slight demotions and taking less power to do what they're elite at and to be very specific with their goals and their responsibilities. I'm super excited, man. I'm telling you, this staff is turning out great. We still got to hire like a tight ends coach, QB's coach, defensive lines coach, and things like that. But as far as like passing game coordinators, you arguably can't do better than the two guys we just hired today. Also, we got to talk about how the Cowboys are hating on the Commanders right now. Straight up hating, blocking us from even being able to interview some guys that we're interested in bringing over to join our staff as well. We're going to talk about that and why. And of course, we got to do a deep dive into each of these guys. Brian Johnson, his history as a quarterback developer and a great offensive mind. Jason Williams, his history as a great defensive back developer. Boy, we need that. Going from Brent Visselmeyer to Jason Simmons, I don't think y'all understand how much of a home run hire this is. We're going to dive into all of that and more, but before we do, make sure you still farm that like button, still farm the subscription button, and still farm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure you stay tuned for everything. I'm super excited. We have so much great information coming out, and every little thing that the Commanders do, no matter how small, no matter how big, I'm gonna do a video breaking it down. And of course, I'm still working on some more mock drafts. I'm working on a trade back mock draft because I saw in my previous mock draft and a lot of the comments, I saw a lot of people saying that they prefer to see a trade back scenario and that they just prefer to trade back just point blank period. So I'm working on one for that. And I'm also working on the Cliff Kingsbury themed mock draft that's going to be very air raid offensive. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I have so many video ideas that I'm working on. I have so many windows, so many tabs on different screens, so many ideas, but things like this just push all of that back. So, and again, I'm working on film sessions for a lot of the draft prospects we may want to take in this draft. So stay tuned for all of that. But without further ado, let's go and get into this video. Let's get it. So apparently the Commanders hired Jonathan Majors as a defensive passing game coordinator and LaShawn McCoy as an offensive pass game coordinator. But to be serious, we now have two new passing game coordinators, one on the offensive side, one on the defensive side. On the offensive side, we have from the Philadelphia Eagles, now Washington Commanders, Brian Johnson, offensive pass game coordinator, former Eagles offensive coordinator in 2023, and he was their QB's coach 2021 and 2022. And then Jason Simmons, he's coming from the Raiders for the same exact role that he had with the Raiders, and some people were looking at him as like a guy that could potentially become a defensive coordinator somewhere. So for him to make a lateral move to come to the Washington Commanders, while there's another guy that just got a promotion to defensive coordinator from the Cowboys, Joe Witt Jr., that's our current defensive coordinator, so it's less likely for him to be going anywhere soon. So it's not like Jason Simmons took this job because there's a chance of him becoming the defensive coordinator next year or within the next 2 years. This is Joe Witt Jr.'s first chance of being a defensive coordinator in his NFL career. So it's not like he plans on leaving anytime soon. So Jason Simmons, I just want to point that out as well. He's making this lateral move just because he simply sees this as like the next big thing. Like, I want to be a part of that staff, that coaching staff, that front office, that organization. I'm willing to make a lateral move with not even a better opportunity to potentially be promoted to a defensive coordinator. I'm just going to the Commanders to do the exact same thing I did for the Raiders, because that organization just looks like that's where you want to be this offseason. You want to get on the ground floor of what looks to be potentially being built into a Super Bowl contender. So that's a big compliment, even just from Jason Simmons' side, with him being a great developer that he is. We're going to talk about him later in the video and break down why we should be super excited about his hire. But even just from his side, for him to take this opportunity to do the exact same thing he was doing for the Raiders shows how great of an organization we're building. Now let's go ahead and talk about LaShawn McCoy, aka Brian Johnson. So we are hiring former Eagles offensive coordinator Brian Johnson to a prominent offensive staff role. It later came out that it was offensive passing game coordinator. And Johnson was Philly's QB coach before the offensive coordinator promotion. Had heard that Washington was eyeing him following the Quinn hire, but seemed a stretch for the offensive coordinator role that eventually went to Cliff Kingsbury. So shouts out to Ben Standig for that, pointing out the fact that this guy was actually getting offensive coordinator calls at one point. So for us to even get him as an offensive passing game coordinator to work under Cliff Kingsbury is phenomenal in itself. A lot of people would argue that he's definitely deserving of an offensive coordinator role. I mean, if you just look at his previous history as well, back at Utah, he was the QB's coach there for a couple of years. Then he was the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach for Utah for the couple of years after that. Then Mississippi State, he was their quarterbacks coach from 2014 through 2016. Then he went to Houston to be the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. Then Florida, he was the quarterbacks coach from 2018 to 2019. Then Florida as well, he stayed there, got promoted offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach. Then he went to the Philadelphia Eagles to be their quarterbacks coach 2021-2022. You saw what he did with Jalen Hurts, and then he was their offensive coordinator last year. And as you've heard, as you can hear, he was a quarterbacks coach everywhere he went. Even if he was an offensive coordinator, it was / quarterbacks coach. He's literally been a quarterbacks coach everywhere he's been, up until the point that he was the offensive coordinator, and that was it for the Philadelphia Eagles last year. Ever since 2010, college and NFL-wise, he's been a quarterbacks coach at least as half of his responsibility. And you also got to note the fact that going back to his Mississippi State days, he was the quarterbacks coach for Dak Prescott when he was there. And again, he also worked with Jalen Hurts in Philly and actually gets a lot of credit for how Jalen Hurts developed into the quarterback that he is now. From that super raw, maybe you could take him coming out of the draft. You're coming from Oklahoma and Alabama. Maybe you could take him in the third round. Maybe that makes sense. To now he's a franchise guy, MVP candidate last year, nearly won it. And a lot of people give him the credit for that, as in Brian Johnson. And again, he was also a hot name after the Eagles moved on from him, because after they fired him, it's not like he's leaving the Eagles to come take a role with us, but he was still currently employed by the Eagles, just like Joe Witt Jr. was still currently employed by the Cowboys before he came here. Even Jason Simmons, who's coming here to be the defensive passing game coordinator, I believe he was still currently employed by the Raiders at the time that he chose to take this job as well. On the other hand, Brian Johnson was straight up fired. This guy was a free agent, but at the same time, he met with the Browns, the Bucks, the Saints, along with other teams for a position like offensive coordinator or offensive passing game coordinator, whatever. But a lot of teams are interested in this guy. And this is starting to look like a trend of guys that are offensive geniuses that maybe bit off a little more than they could chew with their previous jobs. And now they're willing to take a little less power, a slightly lower title and position on a staff so that they can only focus on what they're elite at. Because Cliff Kingsbury, just to show the trend, is an elite offensive coordinator, an elite offensive mind, but head coaching had him spread a little too thin and got in the way of his ability of being his offensive genius that he is. And then Brian Johnson on his side is an elite quarterback developer, well proven. That's how he got the offensive coordinator job from the Eagles once Shane Steichen left the Eagles to become the head coach for the Colts. But his time as offensive coordinator didn't go exactly the way that he wanted it, and now he's taken a slight step back in his career path to focus on literally just that. Quarterback development and the passing game alone, just overseeing the passing game, all of that stuff. And I'm very confident that he can go back to being highly coveted around the NFL once again after what he does with us. Because I feel like the Eagles' offensive failures last year were not his fault. And I also feel like it's exaggerated. We can't call that offensive failures. Those guys were top 8 in total offense and points last year. To be more specific, they were 7th in yards and 8th in points out of the entire NFL. If that's a failure, give me some of that. Like, I know they collapsed towards the end of the season, but it's not like he did a bad job with that offense at all. Yeah, of course, he didn't live up to the Super Bowl or bust expectations that Philly had for him, especially the fan base, especially after they were just in the Super Bowl the previous year. But even as a first-time offensive coordinator, on top of that, to come in and immediately take them back to the Super Bowl, it's hard enough to go back-to-back Super Bowls as well. But I feel like, if anything, it wasn't even like he was bad at his job. I feel like it was more so the Eagles' defense than the offense. But yeah, the whole team as a total collapse. But I don't feel like that's more so his fault. I don't feel like he deserves as much blame as he's been getting. I just don't think that means he's bad at his job. And it wasn't even just an entire year ago that people were talking about him basically the way that they've been talking about Bobby Slowick and Ben Johnson this coaching cycle. It was Brian Johnson last year that was getting a lot of the notoriety, everybody trying to take him away, and people were actually surprised that he just decided to stay with the Eagles as an offensive coordinator. Like, basically, to put it in better perspective, imagine if Bobby Slowick and the Texans have a down year this 2024 upcoming season. You wouldn't want Bobby Slowick here next year, basically, to join your offensive staff in any way possible, even if it's just like a passing game coordinator, just simply because the Texans had a down year this year. All of that hype that we have for Bobby Slowick coming off of this year from the Texans is basically the same thing that just happened with Brian Johnson. But again, they were top 8 in points and yards, so it's not even like they really had a bad year. He got promoted to offensive coordinator for a reason. And Mitchell Tisler brought this up when people talking about Brian Johnson. Somebody said, quote, he had a great rapport with Hurts and helped him to be his best in 2022. He has potential to succeed, but ran into a buzzsaw, taking over play calling duties for a team with Super Bowl or bust aspirations and a fan base that has zero tolerance for learning curves. I mean, you could argue that if the Eagles would have just stayed patient, again, top 8 offense last year, and all metrics possible for an offense that I think that's very successful, but even to their eyes being a failure, if they would have gave him another year or two, maybe he could get them back to the Super Bowl offense that they had. And so I'm just happy that the Eagles were impatient, because I feel like we lucked up here getting a Brian Johnson. He's not even coming here to be an offensive coordinator. He's the offensive passing game coordinator under Cliff Kingsbury. So I think this is a home run hire, especially with him not being brought here to handle like play calling duties. Again, that was his first time having play calling duties for the Eagles. He won't even have to do that here. Just go back to being a great QB developer and let Cliff Kingsbury handle everything else in the offense. And then Dan Quinn is the head coach managing everything. And then Adam Peters and Eugene Shen are running the front office and all of the player personnel decisions for agency and draft. You're literally just coming here to do exactly what you're great at. I mean, I know we were worried about us getting a lot of elite offensive minds on our staff and them potentially being taken away by other teams. That's why a lot of people prefer an offensive-minded head coach rather than a defensive-minded one like Dan Quinn. But I feel like we kind of lucked up in this situation, even though it's still very likely to happen because it just happens. But I think we have the perfect combination of coaches that are most likely to not get taken by another team, even after having successful seasons, because teams will potentially look at Cliff Kingsbury as a guy that can only succeed as an offensive coordinator and not a head coach. No matter how explosive and potent our offense ends up being with Cliff Kingsbury as our offensive coordinator. And the same thing with Brian Johnson. With some people considering what he did with the Eagles as a failure, teams may think he could only succeed as a QB developer and passing game coordinator and not a full-blown offensive coordinator that's running the entire show, calling plays and things like that. So this may actually benefit us down the road with the hires that we made. I mean, this may be like a chess not checkers type of situation. I'm not saying that if our offense looks great this season, especially within just 1 year of it looking so bad, the teams will not want to take these guys from us. But I am saying that it's less likely to happen. And even if it does happen, it may take longer than usual. And we may be able to keep this staff together, keep chemistry going for longer than usually it should be allowed to. Typically teams, they see any offensive genius on the staff, they're trying to take that guy and promote him to offensive coordinator and even head coach a lot of the time. But for reasons I've already stated in the past that these guys are coming with, the baggage that they have, the demerits on their resume, the red marks and things like that, we may be able to hold on to these guys a little bit longer. So this may be best case scenario for us. We have untapped potential in some offensive minded geniuses, and these guys with their previous failures where they were previously with different titles, higher level of responsibility, teams may not want to give them a chance to do that same thing for them. And we may be able to hold on to these guys longer than we should. I'm excited. And then again, just to go back, Eagles were top 7 in all offensive categories that matter. I think if anything, it was the defense that failed the Eagles more than the offense. But I'm happy that for us as a Commanders fan, it's great that Brian Johnson is getting a lot of the blame, because now we just slipped up and stumbled upon a great offensive mind, and we're not only are we not asking him to be a head coach, he's not even the offensive coordinator, he's not even calling plays. So I'm super excited about that. And even though I think trading back and focusing on building a great team for the quarterback first in this offseason, and then getting the quarterback in 2025, build the team first, add the quarterback to the team rather than get the quarterback and then build the team around said quarterback, even though I think that could potentially happen and that could be a good idea, I think it could make a lot of sense. But with all of these quarterback developers that we're bringing into this one coaching staff, it's starting to sound more and more like we are taking quarterback number 2 overall, even more than I originally thought. I personally am a guy that's happy either way. Either way we go, trade back, take quarterback at number 2, even trade up to number 1, take quarterback. I'm happy, but I do prefer to just go ahead and say quarterback at number 2. If I had to pick one of the 3 options that I like the most, it's take quarterback number 2 overall. But at the same time, I'm very happy either way we go, because at the end of the day, I love this staff that we're building, plus Adam Peters and Eugene Shin on the front office side of things. So with as much trust as I have in these guys, I'm just going to give them the benefit of the doubt, to the point that whatever they decide to do in this upcoming draft, I'm very optimistic that they made the right choice, because they put a lot of time and hard work and thinking and a lot of deliberation as to what they should do. And whatever decision they come to, I'm just going to assume it was the best decision for this team. But again, at the end of the day, these hirings seem to scream taking quarterback number 2 overall, just to give you a heads up. But no matter what they do, I'm excited. I'm optimistic. I'm super in the club of giving all of these guys the benefit of the doubt, because it seems like they're doing so many things the right way right now. And as always, man, shouts out to Resh Manuel for always having the crazy background info. And this guy went to high school with this guy for 1 year, and they played pickup basketball here one random day. He's the guy for that. If you're not following him on Twitter, you're missing out. So when it comes to background info, this is the guy, especially for Commanders. And he brought up a great fact. Brian Johnson was UFL teammates with Jayden Daniels' passing game coordinator, Cortez Hankton. So does this potentially increase our chances of getting Jayden Daniels in the draft? Maybe so. Also, at the same time, Brian Johnson has a connection to Drake May as well. He and UNC assistant head coach Charlton Warren were on the Florida Gators staff together. So there's that interesting connection as well, all provided by Resh Manuel. Again, if you love information like that, he's your guy, especially for the Burgundy and Gold fan base. Follow him on Twitter. Now moving on to the hiring of Raiders Jason Simmons. I'm very excited about this one as well. Again, the Commanders are hiring Raiders defensive pass game coordinator Jason Simmons for the exact same role here. And like I already said earlier in the video, why I'm so excited about the fact that he's willing to take the same role to make a lateral move to go from the Raiders to the Commanders, jumping ship, getting a hold of our organization and getting it on the ground up before we rise too high to where we don't even want them. He's like, man, I know I'm highly coveted out here. I know a lot of teams want us, but I want the Commanders just as bad as they want me. I'm telling you, man, that move right there, lateral, I don't think y'all understand how big that is for us. And Jason Simmons goes way back with Joe Witt Jr. to their time together in Green Bay. So there's a strong connection there coming into play, especially in our favor, because I'm telling y'all, this is a guy right here. And I'm so excited about getting Jason Simmons that even if Joe Witt Jr. was primarily brought here just because of that connection to Jason Simmons, I would be excited just for that. But even alone and isolated, I really love the Joe Witt hire, even outside of him helping us get Jason Simmons. But him being able to help pull Jason Simmons over our staff is a home run hire, in my opinion, for both guys. That connection right there, the chemistry that he has with Dan Quinn with their time for the Cowboys, and Joe Witt's connection to Jason Simmons with their time for the Green Bay Packers is beautiful, man. Chef kiss, I'm super excited. And just to let you know, shouts out to Burgundy Blog for this. Commanders' new defensive passing game coordinator, Jason Simmons, played in the NFL for 9 years and has coached DBs in the NFL for 13 more. This is not Brent Vesselmeyer. Brent Vesselmeyer, even though a lot of us were kind of looking at his resume like, well, maybe, to look at it glass half full, maybe he's one of those high potential guys like the next Sean McVay, but of the secondary team thing like that. But he had no proven history of developing guys. This guy does. This guy has a well-rounded resume of proven history. He gets a lot of credit for developing Jair Alexander, Dante Jackson, Jack Jones, along with a lot of other players, and a lot of people give him credit for the Raiders having the 9th ranked scoring defense last year in the NFL. This is a guy that develops and produces. Brent Vesselmeyer, shouts out to you, more power to you. I was fairly excited about that hire because he was kind of like the young up-and-coming guy, but he had no proven history. This guy's the young up-and-coming guy and also has a lot of proven history. I'm super excited. So please, if you can come in here and fix Emmanuel Forbes and Benjamin St-Juste, that would be huge. And then to be able to help continue the development of a Quan Martin, a Percy Butler, and a Derek Forrest, man, and potentially even Cameron Curl if we end up keeping him, if we re-sign him to a long-term contract. I'm telling you, man, y'all are gonna love this Jason Simmons hire. I may do a video just solely on him and his development of Jair Alexander and all of those guys, like what they've said about him and exactly what he did to improve those guys and things like that. But for now, just know he's that guy when it comes to that. And again, shouts out to Resh Manuel once again, because he provided the fact that Jason Simmons was part of that 2007 Texans team that had future head coaches in Kyle Shanahan, Matt LaFleur, Mike McDaniels, Robert Saleh, and DeMeco Ryans. And also Anthony Weaver and Jeff Zgonina were on that same staff as well. So, hey man, maybe there was just something in the water in that staff, and maybe he got a little bit of that, and maybe he's the next bright, young, defensive-minded guy. He could potentially be like the next Mike McDonald type of guy, and we have him on our staff as a defensive passing game coordinator. Look at all of that genius in this defensive group, along with all of the genius that we have in the offensive group, and which takes me to my next point, why I'm so optimistic about these two hires, and why the development of the Commanders is going to go sky high through the roof compared to what we've had. Again, Brent Vesselmeyer is the DB's coach compared to what we had in Chris Harris, and you could argue that Jason Simmons may even have a higher ceiling than Chris Harris had as a DB developer. You saw the dump off, the extreme decline going from Chris Harris to Brent Vesselmeyer. Now see that same slope, but in a positive way, going back up to Jason Simmons. The development here is going to be crazy on the defensive side, especially the DB group because of him. And then the quarterback side of things with Brian Johnson, with what he did with Dak Prescott and Jalen Hurts, I'm telling you, man. First of all, I want to point out the fact that I love how much NFC scouting we have, because Dan Quinn and Joe Witt Jr. literally made the Cowboys defense great and knows them in and out even better than the next defensive coordinator that they'll potentially end up hiring, at least for a little while until he gets to know that team better. And then Brian Johnson developed Dak Prescott in college, the Dallas Cowboys quarterback, and developed Jalen Hurts at the NFL level, the Philadelphia Eagles quarterback. So if anybody knows the weaknesses of those teams, it's us, the habits and the weaknesses. And then playing against those teams in your division twice a year on Dan Quinn's side as a head coach is big time. Like, first of all, beating our division is priority number one. So Brian Johnson coming here to give us an advantage there. Dan Quinn and Joe Witt Jr. there as well. But it's not even just the Eagles and the Cowboys, the Giants as well. Dan Quinn has to go against the Giants, the Cowboys, well, now the Cowboys, but he's gone against the Commanders, the Giants, and the Eagles twice a year. So if anybody knows their weaknesses and strengths, it's him. He's very familiar with those things. And then also that gives him a head start here as a head coach. With him having to go against the Commanders twice a year, if anybody knows our weaknesses and strengths better than any other potential head coaching candidate out there, even like a Ben Johnson, a Bobby Slowick, or a Mike McDonald, Dan Quinn knows the Commanders better than any of those guys do, so we can get a jump start on things quicker with Dan Quinn as our head coach than any of those other guys. But again, most importantly, we have the best scouting of the rest of the division that we could possibly put together as a staff. I mean, you can't get much better than Dan Quinn knowing all of the teams really well, Brian Johnson knowing Dak Prescott and Jalen Hurts' weaknesses as well as you can know them out of anybody. He's literally the guy that groomed them to be what they are right now. I'm telling you, man. So I'm super excited because Joe Witt Jr. and Jason Simmons, with the way that they're going to develop this DBs group and the way that Cliff Kingsbury and Brian Johnson, their track records of developing quarterbacks. Cliff Kingsbury alone just by himself, Kyler Murray, he made Johnny Manziel into what people thought he was and had everybody fooled. I mean, his offense was so great that Johnny Manziel looked as great as he did. He's the reason for Pat Mahomes going in the first round. Now, of course, you got to give the Chiefs credit for Pat Mahomes becoming the MVP caliber player, that literally the best quarterback in the NFL that he is. But Cliff Kingsbury is the one that turned a completely overlooked high school recruit into a first round quarterback. Remember, the Chiefs drafted Pat Mahomes in the first round. Not like they stole him in the fifth. They took him in the first round, and Cliff Kingsbury deserves pretty much the majority of the credit for Pat Mahomes even looking as good as he did for the Chiefs to take him. I mean, the development of quarterbacks, that list between Cliff Kingsbury and Brian Johnson is just unmatched. So our DBs group and our quarterbacks, if anything else, are going to be way better than what they've been in the past. I'm super excited about that. The Commanders are putting together a crazy staff, and like I said, one of the biggest advantages to hiring Dan Quinn as a head coach was his potential to be able to recruit a really good staff. I said it even before we hired Dan Quinn. Out of all of the candidates that we interviewed up to the point of like a couple of weeks ago, including Ben Johnson, including Bobby Slowick, including Mike McDonald, Dan Quinn had the potential to hire the best staff outside of the head coach. We could talk about head coaching wise why we would prefer Ben Johnson or Bobby Slowick or Mike McDonald, but as far as hiring the guys around the head coach, positional coaches, passing game coordinators, defensive coordinator, all of that, offensive coordinator, I mean, look at us right now. Ben Johnson and Bobby Slowick didn't even get the chance to become head coaches. Mike McDonald is out here struggling to put a staff together. He doesn't even have an offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator right now. He's struggling. He doesn't have the connections around the NFL. All he knows is basically Ravens and Michigan. Shouts out to him, though, being a Georgia Bulldog. You know what I'm saying? I'm rooting for you and all. But there's a reason Dan Quinn was able to go in, with Magic Johnson's help, go over there and steal Cliff Kingsbury from the Raiders, to steal Joe Witt Jr. from the Cowboys. Now Brian Johnson from the Eagles, well, even though he got fired technically, but even Jason Simmons from the Raiders, to make a lateral move from the Raiders to the Commanders. Dan Quinn is a big reason for all of that. And again, you have Mike McDonald on the other side, even though you could definitely argue that he's a brighter defensive mind, a guy with a higher ceiling and more potential. This guy doesn't even have an offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator right now. He's struggling to put a staff together. Meanwhile, the Commanders are hitting home run after home run with everybody we've added so far, in my eyes, in my opinion. Also, we got to talk about, moving on, the Cowboys hating on us and blocking our interviews. Well, in addition to blocking the Washington Commanders from interviewing Cowboys tight end coach Lunda Wells, the Cowboys also denied the Commanders from speaking with DB's coach Al Harris, who I've talked about in several videos already that I hope we can bring over. And these are major developments because it shows that these are guys that we're interested in, but the Cowboys are like, nah, I'm not letting you get that one. And Craig Hoffman brings up a great point. While a bummer, the Cowboys would be pretty silly to just let Dan Quinn bring over everyone he wants to a division rival and weaken themselves at the same time in the process. And I'm sure that if they could have, they would have blocked us getting Joe Witt Jr. as a defensive coordinator. We had to give him a promotion to get him. And probably the same thing with Dan Quinn. If we didn't promote him from defensive coordinator for the Cowboys to head coach for the Commanders, maybe the Cowboys blocked that. Because plain and simple, you have to promote somebody to steal them from a different team. Otherwise, they have the right to block them. If you bring them over as a lateral move, they have the team that they're currently a coach for, that they're under contract for, has every chance to block them if you want them to, if they want to. So basically, in my opinion, I'm pretty sure about this, the Cowboys would have done everything they could to keep Joe Witt Jr., but we were able to promote him and we stole him away from him. But they're like, nah, you can't get tight ends coach Lunda Wells or DB's coach Al Harris. And shouts out to Mark Bullock for bringing up this point. Al Harris was likely to be a target for Dan Quinn and Joe Witt Jr. in Washington. With the reviews that Harris gets from players, it's no surprise that Dallas blocked it. We'll be interested to see if he gets retained by whoever is brought in as a defensive coordinator, which is an interesting point because they may be going somewhere else with this situation. They may not even hire Al Harris as their defensive coordinator. Right now, they're interviewing Marquand Manuel for the defensive coordinator job. He's the New York Jets safeties coach. And that has me looking like, uh-oh. Because if you think about it, if that guy that they end up hiring, if they end up hiring that Manuel guy as their defensive coordinator, he could potentially want to bring and build his own staff, which means Al Harris may end up being on the outside looking in. So if they don't hire Al Harris as a defensive coordinator, and I've heard rumors from a lot of different places, a lot of sources saying that Al Harris may not even want to be a defensive coordinator yet. Maybe eventually in life, but right now he just wants to stay doing his specific job right now. So it's not looking likely that he'll be hired as a defensive coordinator for the Cowboys. And again, they're already interviewing Manuel, the Jets safeties coach. And if he wants to build his own staff, Al Harris may end up actually getting let go by the Cowboys. And at that point, I wouldn't be surprised if we swooped in immediately. I really hope that happens. Again, players love Al Harris. His development of DBs is fantastic. They go way back, proven track record. And some people even think that he could be the next like defensive Sean McVay, like basically the next Mike McDonald. So if we can end up getting him as well on top of Jason Simmons, come on, man. But it's a little ugly because it was looking like that if we could steal Al Harris away from the Cowboys, again, you have to promote a guy so that the other team that you're taking them from can't block them. You would have to promote them. He's already DB's coach, so the next thing would be defensive passing game coordinator, but we just hired Jason Simmons for that job. So the only way we could get Al Harris is if the Cowboys end up firing him because the defensive coordinator, the new defensive coordinator there, doesn't want him, which would be just insane. I mean, they would be stupid not to take him. But at the same time, no, the Cowboys didn't hate on us completely. They did give us permission to speak to assistant defensive lines coach Sheriff Floyd and quality control / defensive assistant Pete Onigian, however you pronounce that, I don't know. But either way, that's somebody that Dan Quinn has experience working with, being the Cowboys defensive coordinator for the past 3 years. So maybe just to keep a lookout, those are some guys that we may be interested in. Now, it is interesting that the Cowboys decided not to block those and was like, yeah, y'all can take them. So I don't know how great they are at their jobs, but be on the lookout because those are two potential names that may end up on the commander staff. Because again, Dan Quinn and Joe Witt Jr. have prior experience working alongside those guys, and for us to want to interview them, they must have done something right. But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. Please get in the comment section, let me know how you feel about everything discussed in this video. Please stiff on that like button, stiff on the subscription button, stiff on the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinion video just like this one. And like I said in the intro, well, before the intro video, I have so many video ideas I'm working on: mock drafts, film sessions, every little update going on, any more coaching additions that we do once we hire a tight ends coach, if we hire a quarterbacks coach, all of that stuff. I'm gonna keep y'all updated on all of that. And of course, we're gonna do deep dives into all of these guys, why we're happy that we hired them or why we're potentially not happy that we hired them. But so far, I think everything has been home run hires. I mean, we could debate about Dan Quinn, but the fact that he's been able to help bring in all of these guys that are obviously home run hires only adds to his hire and how high I would give the Dan Quinn hiring. So I'm super excited about this whole thing. This coaching staff is amazing. This front office is amazing. We still have more work to do, but I'm super excited. I'm super optimistic. Most cap space in the NFL, number 2 overall draft pick. How can you not be excited as a Commanders fan? You have guys like Jason Simmons, who some people look at as potentially the next Mike McDonald, and he made a lateral move to go from the Raiders to the Commanders just to be a part of this. If they can see how bright the future is for this organization, I don't know how y'all as a fan base cannot yet. I'm telling you now. If you fell off, if you for some reason left the Commanders fan base, you've been hiding your jersey under your shirts, it's now time to bring it out because our future is bright. I'm super excited. I think we'll be Super Bowl contenders sooner than a lot of y'all probably think. So of course, let me know in the comment section how you feel about these hires. Of course, let me know how you feel about the Cowboys blocking us from interviewing certain guys. Should we keep pursuing Al Harris to see what's going on with that situation, if he may end up being a free agent anyway? How do you feel about the Brian Johnson hire on offense, the Jason Simmons hire on defense? Let me know all of that. Of course, I tried my best to try to read and reply to as many comments as possible, but super busy as you can see. Appreciate y'all. I'm gonna catch y'all later with the next video. I'm out.